I am going to be talking about the post office. I have tossed a link to my slides and links for all of this stuff. I just put it in the chat, but it's also in the Discord. This is just going to be kind of a fun sprint through some fun stuff about the post office. And actually, just kind of like Jenny, my mother, who passed a couple years ago, was like the post office huge fanatic in my family. And me and my sister have kind of carried that on with the two of us. So let me share my slides and we'll get going. Quick confirm, people can see this?
No.
All right, sorry, wait, I'm clicking the wrong thing. Hold on. Quick confirm, people can see this?
Yes.
Excellent. Great. And I've got my phone in front of me, but if I'm starting to push ahead on time, do let me know. Basically, this is just talking about the post office, things I like about the post office, and a little bit of plug for writing some cards and letters, especially since so many of us are trapped at home in various ways. So couple facts, starting with rural free delivery, which was really the beginning of the post office being able to get mail to actually everybody. Like the public library, the post office has a mandate. I mean, mandate may be strong, but to serve everyone, right? Everyone deserves the mail. And so while city delivery came in 1863, and then we didn't get mail slots until 1923. So in many cases, the person who was delivering the mail would have to just wait for the person to get home to hand them their mail, which was ridiculous. And they spent a lot of time just waiting for people. 1896 was when we got delivery to rural areas. And in many cases, mail would be like you can see on this slide. There's a letter that says Jessamine West, RFD, Stowe Road, Boxborough, which is what my address was when I was a kid. We were on the rural free delivery route that served Stowe Road. And in some cases, in fact, when I first moved to Vermont in the 90s, I was rural route 2 in the small town that I lived in Vermont. So you didn't even have like a street address. It was before E911 needed to know where you were. You just had your rural delivery address and there was the post person. Really, they were almost all mailmen at the time who would be delivering your mail. And this was back when 65% of the population was rural. So basically the turn of the last century was when nearly universal mail delivery became a thing. And one of the other things that people tend to not know about rural mail delivery, unless you receive rural mail delivery, is you get services from the postal delivery worker in addition to just getting your mail. So when I lived in Vermont, I could leave money like cash or a check in my mailbox and I could get stamps delivered to my mailbox from my postal delivery person. And this is still true actually in rural areas. They call it a post office on wheels, which is, I copied straight from the website, which is why the little trademark thing is there. And post offices didn't all used to be the kind of brick institutional buildings that we sort of think of more now. They were more fluid. They would often move around within a town. A lot of times they would also be in the general store. You find fewer and fewer of those, but they still exist. And in some cases in people's houses. And it's always interesting in Vermont, especially when I tool around and if I visit somebody at their house, you can often tell if somebody's living in a house that used to be a post office because they had a very familiar sort of front room, back room layout that was like sort of custom built to be home post office. And these post offices began to close as more and more people, as the rural urban shift started. So there were actually the most post offices in the United States in 1901. There have been fewer and fewer since then. And it's pretty interesting because my town, which is fairly small town in relative terms, but fairly big in Vermont, it's 4,500 people, has actually 3 post offices. We have the village post office and we have the the center of town post office, which was where the center of town was before the railroad came through. And then there's the East Randolph post office, which is on the other side of the highway, because when the highway came through, suddenly people were on the other side of everything. So a couple people you might not know, one of the things about the post office, and I recommend a lot of books to read, but specifically this book, There's Always Work at the Post Office, talking about how, because these were government jobs, and in many cases, you know, safer than, say, the military, it was a way of achieving sort of middle-class status, especially for African Americans who were sort of entering the workplace late 1800s, early 1900s. This, you know, went with sort of the Northern migration and everything else. And what it meant was there were a lot of people of color who had, particularly Black workers, who had cool jobs at the post office and kind of moved up the ladder. One of my, I do a lot of stuff on Wikipedia, and one of my little Wikipedia tasks has been ensuring that early people of color who had high-ranking jobs in the United States Postal Service have Wikipedia pages, which has been kind of a fun quarantine project. So Minnie Cox was actually the nation's first female Black postmaster. She was the postmaster in Indianola, Mississippi. She was very good at her job. Her husband was a banker, et cetera, et cetera. But Mississippi, being sort of what Mississippi was at the time, she was continually harassed by white supremacists who wanted her to leave her job and thought that they could harass her out of a job. And Minnie Cox was not going to be harassed out of a job. And she, you know, tried to resign. The president, who was actually the person who kind of helped the postmasters get sort of where they were, basically said, I'm not letting you resign. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're just going to close the Indianola post office. So they don't get to get mail anymore. Basically, it becomes sort of a cubbyhole on the side of the highway. They don't get a postmaster, for shame. Because what they were saying is, oh, you should bring the National Guard in. And instead he's like, nope, racists don't get mail. And they closed the post office until they worked something out. She actually went back to her job there and then eventually just retired on her own terms, and her husband opened a bank and settled out and did some other stuff. And fascinating story. The thing I should also mention is that link that I gave you has links where you can read more about any one of these things if you're interested. So next thing was one of the other people, or the other groups of people who received kind of new independence with the mail, was women, or ladies at the time, who could then have private communication with people. And you know, people can be like, ooh, titillating, like they could meet men, but realistically they could just communicate with any other people outside the home in order to do whatever the heck they wanted without their, you know, husband, partner, sort of parents, overweening people, sort of trying to control them, saying they couldn't. But because the post office was also a place of public gathering, people were concerned in that way they do, that they could also meet men at the post office, like waiting in line. And that was going to be too, you know, outre for the time. And so they established in many of these large city post offices these ladies' delivery windows where women could go and get and send mail, basically in many major cities. And they were a special part of sort of old post offices. And you can see still, you know, fragments of what used to be the ladies section or the ladies windows at United States post offices. One of the other sort of early postal inventions, because when the post office was sort of owned and run and managed and funded by the federal government, they were always looking for sort of cost affordances, but also, you know, like in library technology and other things, there was also people trying to sell them something, right? So in New York City, they had a very early sort of pneumatic subway line. And they also had, actually for much longer than you would think, a pneumatic mail delivery system that essentially let, you know, local mail going between different places in New York City go through these pneumatic tubes. And it was sort of a good news, bad news situation. The pneumatic tubes weren't that big. They didn't hold that much mail. There was like these greaser tubes that went through that were just these slimy, greasy things that you'd shoot through the tube every now and again to kind of lube them up. Yeah, and Jenny points out hospitals still use them. Home Depot until recently used to use them. A lot of drive-up banking windows use them. Like they've got some really cool implementations, but the mail thing, it was huge. It was this huge system. If you click the link in my list of links, it goes to a PDF where you can read all about it. US Post Office is actually very good at documenting their own history in some ways. This picture that's at the bottom of, and the people who managed and ran this system at up to 130 people at a time were called Rocketeers, which was kind of a cool name to have for a job in the, you know, the early 19th century. This is a picture of a man sending a cat through a pneumatic tube just as proof of concept. Cat didn't like it, but cat did live. And that became, you know, sort of a cutie poo thing that wound up in the news sort of everywhere. This is my favorite Vermont postal trivia bit, even though there are a lot of Vermont postal trivia bits. Like small towns are just rife for post office stories. But Rudyard Kipling, who, you know, many people have heard about, he wrote the Jungle Book in Vermont, and he was incredibly popular in his day, just like this wacky celebrity, and everybody wanted a piece of him. And he was driving the Dummerston post office, which was like a tiny town, tiny post office, just out of their minds because most of the mail they were receiving was for him. And it was exhausting. And by all accounts, he was actually kind of a pain in the neck of a human being too, but he was also friends with fancy people, right? And so he applied for a personal post office from the United States government, and it got set up in this building. This is a newer picture of this building. It's not what it looked like at the time. But basically it was called Waite, Vermont, and Waite was the name of the family that lived in this house. It was next door to Kipling's house in Vermont, and it received Kipling's mail, and he loved it. Like it was so snooty that like, oh, I have my own post office, so la-di-da, please, you know, send it to me. And it's the only time a post office has been set up for a single person, and it ran for basically 2 years in the 1890s and is not actually particularly well documented considering how cool this bit of trivia is. 1963 is when we got the zip code, which would help automatic mail sorters, you know, send mail to your place. And zip codes still do that. I have a post office box, and so you can basically send a letter to me literally by writing 05060-0345. And that's a unique identifier that goes to me personally, which I always think is kind of cool. Also, the numbers are kind of cool and they seem good together. But the other people that love zip codes are people who are trying to do marketing, right? Because census tracts are kind of big, and they include a lot of people who are sort of inside and outside what might be considered your demographics, but there's only about 7,000 people who share your zip code, and that means you're more likely to sort of share information. People probably know this about the post office, but they have not taken any public money since 1982, though you can get money orders at the post office. This is a picture of a little post office bank that I have, which I think is adorable. However, the government still gets to legislate the post office. And so you've probably heard about all of that, like, oh gosh, you know, it's the beginning of the end for the post office. I try to think that that is not true, but it is worth thinking about. If you're interested in random post offices, which to be honest, I totally am, there's a great Twitter handle, which is just everylot_USPS. I have it on a Twitter list that is just them and this Twitter handle that's In Town Again, which is just the lyrics to The Boys Are Back in Town Again, and it intersperses them, and occasionally it the juxtaposition kind of makes me laugh. But you can just look at a Twitter thread of random US post offices, and it really does give you a lot of information on how different these things are. And my post office, my long-suffering post office, does receive a lot of weird mail from me, but because it is a small town, they can usually sort of figure it out. The bottom letter just says Jessamine West, Bethel, Vermont. I don't live in Bethel anymore. That was my previous town, but that got to me because people knew me. And literally the one above it is a postcard that says the woman who received all the other odd mail, 05060. And this is when I ask people to send me postcards for my birthday. And my last part of this talk is to encourage people to send letters or postcards to other people, and to just sort of give you the thumbs up that you're going to do a good job of it, whatever it is. A letter can be personal. It's okay if it's just chatty. It's okay if it's really short. And really, it's more important to put your letter in the mail and send it than to have sent the perfect sentiment. I usually have this simple formula, which is you open with a greeting, you know, say, hey, I was thinking about you, or this thing reminded me of you, or you were in my dream, or hey, it's your birthday. A little bit of an anecdote about what you've been up to. I went for a walk and I saw this cool rock. Oh, this interesting thing happened in my town. I'm reading a book I thought you might be interested in. You wrap it up. Hey, I hope we can get together soon, next year in Jerusalem, whatever your thing is. And then sign it with your name. One of the things that happens to me sometimes, because I do receive a lot of mail, not bragging, just true, is sometimes people send it, you know, John from New York City. And then I have to be like, who is this? Like, this could be one of 4 different Johns from New York City. I know. Put your whole name on it, or at least as much of your name as you know. Draw a little scribble on the end, put it on the end. And what you can do if you decide to go down this route is there are many fun stamps that are available for you. I linked to some that you can get. These are some of my favorites: spooky stamps, hip hop stamps, Ezra Jack Keats Snowy Day stamps, which continue to be my favorite. You can make your own envelopes out of old books, magazines, pieces of paper, maps. It's very easy to just do this kind of like 4-fold, put a stamp on it, you're done. You almost don't need tape if you can do it the right way and put the stamp in the right way. But making fun envelopes, good use of your time, good way to get rid of some extra paper, good way to make somebody smile on the other end. And if you would like to read more, I love how we're all kind of ending with, by the way, read some more books. But there's a couple really good books. The Postal Age, which talks about modern communication, is where I read and learned about the ladies' window. How the Post Office Created America talks a lot about how postal rates and low cost being able to transmit things like news really changed how America grew and expanded. And every stamp tells a story. From the National Philatelic Collection is a really great look at some classic stamps where you learn a little bit about America and you learn a little bit more about stamps when you're at it. I have read all of these books. I really like them. Jenny has linked to some great stamps that are coming next year. I am one of those people who just gets really excited about good upcoming stamps. And lastly, if you want to keep in touch with me, or maybe practice some letter writing, but you're not totally confident about your skills, that is how to get in touch with me. This is a picture of a mailman delivering packages on a USPS bicycle. And there's the web address again, if you are interested in diving into any of these links. It also has my image credits, and it also has just the picture version of all of these slides if I jump past any of them too quickly. So thank you very much for your time. And let me check the chat because I have a couple more things I can mention if people do not have questions. Oh yeah, oh my gosh, please pneumatic tube talk next time. And the other thing my sister told me to mention, because I told her I'm doing this talk and I showed her my slides, and she and I both found out this week that we both buy old stamps on eBay. A lot of times, like, you know, a stamp collector dies and his family's like, we don't need these stamps, we're gonna sell them on eBay. And not like super like valuable stamps, but just like, you know, stamps from 10 or 15 years ago that are still good. And a lot of times you can buy those stamps for lower than face value, and they're still stamps, so you can use them for full face value to send letters. My sister and I just found out this week that we both do that on eBay, which means that we both actually may be bidding against each other to buy old stamps. The other thing she told me to mention when I told her about this talk was if you get junk mail that you do not appreciate and you cannot make it stop, one of the things you can do is tell the post office via filling out very official forms that you consider the mail that you're getting from whoever the junk mail people are explicit and I believe obscene, but because obscenity is not a defined term, you can just say you think it's obscene because junk mail is obscene, and you can fill out a form, and then that company gets a threatening, menacing letter from you. And then if they send you any additional junk mail, they have to deal with the fact that they can be fined or they owe you money because they sent you terrible, terrible mail in the mail. So if you need more information on how to get off junk mail lists, I did this very effectively to get off of some junk mail lists that my late father was on. Like I forwarded all of his mail to me, and some of it was mail I wanted to stop getting and I couldn't stop getting it. And that is how I did it. So post office still doing okay. Reports of its demise are greatly exaggerated. Oh, and also Mr. McFeely, the mailman, if I remember correctly, McFeely, which always sounds like a weird name for a mailman, was actually Mr. Rogers' mother's maiden name. Like McFeely was actually a family name, which is why you had such a slightly strange name for a mailman on a child's TV show. Thank you guys very much for your attention and letting me geek out about stamps. One of my favorite things. Thanks.